Hey everybody, welcome to the Daniel Davis Deep Dive Intel Brief, where we give you the best of what we had this week, what we learned, and even some new things today that you might not already have known. Let's jump right into it. First of all, let's start with the current issues here that you may not have seen. This was in yesterday's news in the Wall Street Journal that Zelensky is heading to Mar-a-Lago. Apparently, that's going to happen tomorrow if the schedule stays on, and he's going to meet with Trump to, as you see in this headline here, closing gaps in the peace draft deal. And then the high-level talks come. I found this sub-headline pretty funny. High-level talks come after a flurry of U.S.-Ukraine negotiations, but Moscow remains a possible obstacle. Who could have foreseen that? A possible obstacle. Whereas Zelensky's coming in, and you may have seen our Christmas Day show we did where the draft deal that they're talking about here is Zelensky's newest 20-point peace plan. And I went down basically point by point through that and told you how that a lot of things in there are fine and they're useful. Actually, majority numerically are there. The claim is that they're 90% of the way there. And I think that when they say 90% of the way there, I think they mean 90% of the way there between the U.S. and Ukraine, not between the West and Russia. That's a separate issue, unfortunately. Or if that's not what they meant, they're not right one way or the other. But this idea that Russia possibly might be an impediment to these talks here, I mean, gracious folks, you see, we've been covering this for the literal life of this channel. All the things we've been doing for now 2.5 years have been talking about this. This war's been going on for closing in on 4 years now. I've been writing about this. I've been going on television networks, even from 2021 on, all the way through here. And Russia has been profoundly consistent on what they want. They want security on their western flank. They want no NATO. They want a no kind of military alliance. They want a limited military power in Ukraine. They want demilitarization. They want denazification. And they want some guarantees for their ethnic Russians that are living inside of Ukraine. They have never changed it. The only thing that is altered is that it's adjusted here and there about, how important one point is over another. And then as time has gone on, it has included more territory than it did before. Because remember, before all this started in 2014, all of Ukraine was under Kyiv control, and that includes Crimea. But then when the Maidan happened and the coup happened and the civil war broke out, Russia immediately annexed Crimea. And then after the failure of the Minsk agreements and all the things that happened in 2021 with NATO declaring that they would definitely join forces with Ukraine, no matter what, nobody's going to tell them who can and can't be in the alliance, etc. Then, of course, we had this war went in there, too. You can blame Russia, but you can't be surprised that it happened because there's always reaction here. That's where we're at during the time since that broke out. The Russians have been fairly consistent in what they're asking for here. And so now Zelensky's plan, which is a good portion of it, is something that can work with. But there are 4 main points that I talked about in that other video that are basically poison pills that the Russians are just not going to agree to. Then there are 3 things that are omitted that are not even mentioned in it that Russia has to have in order to agree to it. So there's really 7 things that are either present or missing that have to be changed in order to get to the point to where we can have a negotiated. So the idea that there is possibility that the Russians may not be in agreement to that is a little odd, because it's a guarantee that they're not going to be in on it. And until you come to the point to where you can agree to this or not, there's just not going to be an agreement. The war is not going to come to an end. There won't be a ceasefire. Russians have been adamantly clear on that. And in case you were wondering if they have moved any on that, ahead of this meeting, it's going to be in Mar-a-Lago tomorrow. Just hours ago, over in the darkness hours and overnight, Ukraine was again subject to missile and drone attack from the Russians. And of course, they're going after infrastructure. But as you can see from a lot of the videos we keep showing, a lot of these missiles, whether it's errant air defense missiles, I doubt they're all errant air defense missiles. Some of these seem to be hitting civilian targets as well. This is part of the ugly part of war. And we're seeing it break out right now. And Russia, I think the total was, at least what's reported, 519 drones and 40 missiles, which are spread throughout Ukraine. I saw one report that for a while, all the power was knocked out in the capital city. And as a reminder, we had Jennifer from my organization, from Defense for Errors. We had her on our show not too long ago. And she pointed out that she had just returned from Kyiv and that there were about 6 hours per day of electricity for the majority of people, anything short of generators or so. That was then 6 hours a day in the capital city. And then according to this, it was knocked out. As I've also mentioned several times, the chief engineer for Ukraine Energy said several weeks ago that they didn't feel they could suffer more than 2 or 3 more of these major hits and that they would completely lose power generation capacity. I don't know if this was the last one or not. I wasn't able to see before coming on the air here whether or not they got the power restored there, but at least for a period of time this morning, all the electricity was knocked out. But it's just probably a matter of time. There just physically aren't enough parts. If the Russians keep hitting these things over and over, every time something gets knocked out, they bring and they tie shoestring and bubble gum to keep it functioning. Then the Russians come in on a reattack. You can only do that so many times, and then there's going to be a real problem. Then you're going to have a hard time even keeping the lights on, even keeping heating on for your people, or having any kind of industrial capacity on producing the weapons of war. That's kind of where we are right here. I want to look at a couple of things that we did learn this week, which I think were very important. First, we're going to start off with Jacques Beau. We also did a show early this week on some of the bad things that have happened to him because he has the audacity to tell the truth. You can go on our video channel and you can on our video tab rather, and you can look at that video too. Highly recommend it. But in terms of his current analysis assessment, he addressed something that is often intentionally misinterpreted and misinformed by Western leaders about what Russia's objectives are. The claim all the time is that Russia's not really all that good because they've only taken 1% of the territory in the last 2 years, etc. But Colonel Beau explained that's not the objective.
The problem is the West is considering success through some square kilometers. And that's the way they measure success. But remember what Vladimir Putin said on the 24th of February 2022. He said he wanted to demilitarize Ukraine and denazify as well. But the essence of the word is that the objective of the Russians is not territory, is a potential. That's the aim of the Russians. They are not aiming at gaining territory, they are aiming at destroying a potential.
Yeah.
Meaning that you look at the 1,000 last days, maybe the Russians got only 1% of the Ukrainian territory, but they killed tens of thousands of Ukrainians. And that's their objective, not the territory.
So that's territory is a byproduct. I wouldn't go so far, and he wouldn't either, as to say it's not important. It's just not the priority. Our priority, the way of the American way of war, is to get territory. It's to seize the capital city, like taking Baghdad in 2003 or something like that, or to destroy a certain capacity in the field and get there as quickly as we can, like in Desert Storm, etc. That's kind of the way of war. Or I guess in 2001 when we went into Afghanistan and our objective was to drive the Taliban out of power. That was the objective. We had a political move and we moved quickly with whatever force we had to knock a lot of that stuff out. That's not the way the Russians are doing this war. They are doing it differently because their objectives are to demilitarize and denude the threat on their flank. If they went quickly and got a political solution and they let's say that they invested Kyiv and surrounded it and got a capitulation, all of the military capacity would still exist so that they could get some kind of an agreement at the hand, but then all of that military capacity would still be there. And if they didn't get a commensurate demilitarization where they debanded and whatever and they left, then in time that could be recalculated and brought back into fruition and maybe even be better than before and more powerful than before. Russia wants to have a long-term success according to their interpretation of things. So they want to go slower because they don't want to just take territory. They want to destroy the military capacity. So they don't just want an end where there is going to be a no military alliance against them and a neutrality. They also want to make sure, at least for a generation, that there's not going to be the capacity to rebuild an army. There won't be one there. And perversely, the longer we keep going on with this support, the more that we play into Russia's hand because it allows them to keep doing what they've been doing, which is kill Ukrainian men. And we keep just dutifully shoveling them up to the front. and they pay this ultimate sacrifice, and it just plays into Russia's hand, because if we continue to go on the way we have of not having any kind of negotiated settlement, then at some point Russia will literally destroy everything that's in front of them, and there won't be any men left to form any kind of, not at the scale necessary, to ever pose a future threat for literally a generation or more, decades of time into the future. That's where Russia's mentality is. They're thinking long term. We never think long term. We think barely beyond the end of our nose. We think of like 2-year increments in the next election cycle, et cetera, and how this or that affects domestic politics and all those things. That's where we focus on here. And so since Russia's not doing it, we think that they're failing. But it turns out that they're probably going down a path that is going to have decades of success on the backside of it. That's the video we're talking about there. But go be sure and look at that, sanctions, to see how Colonel Jacques Beau is a very courageous man that is unintimidated and uncompromised, the literal manifestation of that. And that even though it has cost him some, and he has been sanctioned, his assets have been frozen, his bank accounts have, he can't even access them anymore. He still nevertheless came on and continues to give us solid, sound advice, because he is not going to be intimidated. And our hats off to you again, Colonel, for what you do. Moving on. Patrick Henningsen was also on this week, and he talked about something I think is really important here. And this is in context of this $90 billion loan that the Europeans this past week agreed to, that they're saying we're going to give Ukraine enough money to fund its operations. And I'm talking about its governmental operations, pay soldiers, et cetera, for 2026 and 2027. So $45 billion each year. They committed to doing this with this loan. Patrick Henningsen came on the show and said, you know what, that's interesting. So we have now committed, the West has, to $90 billion over the next 2 years. What have we gotten? He looked back a little bit over the past 4 years for the approximate $300 billion that we've invested.
This is all fine in this kind of holding pattern. This is the same holding pattern that the Europeans and NATO have been running for 4 years. So if we're right, if Trump is right, and they've spent $300 billion already in 4 years, look at the results on the ground and look at the attrition on the Ukrainian side. That's what $300 billion in arms and finance and so forth gets you. Do you think that another $200 billion over the next 2 years is going to get you a better result? Probably not, because it hasn't worked for the last 4 years. And one would argue that the conditions for Ukraine to have any kind of good outcome are much worse now in 2026 than they were in 2022. This is only buying time for the inevitable. If it accelerates, though, if the Europeans provoke Russia even further and worse, which you're starting to see clues about what they're prepared to do in terms of attacking oil tankers, piracy, terrorist attacks, assassinating Russian officials in Moscow, things like this, then if they want to up the ante, then it becomes a nuclear standoff. And guess what? The United States is back in. They're back in, and they will be in the driving seat 100%. So we're playing around in this kind of interim holding pattern here of the proxy war. But if it escalates the way these European leaders are talking, the United States will invariably be pulled back in.
We'll see. I certainly hope he's wrong there. He said the United States will invariably be pulled back in. I don't know for sure that that's the case. I have doubts about that. I know that's the intent, and Patrick Henningsen is 100% right there. That is definitely the intent of what these people want. When I say these people, I'm talking about European leaders and Ukrainian leaders. They have been doing everything in their power from the beginning to draw the United States in and to get us to go in with them. It hasn't worked so far. It didn't even work under Biden. Biden gave a lot of stuff, but he was always rightly afraid of having a direct conflict with Russia. He was wrong in that he kept toying around and playing around the edges of it, but he was right to always be cautious. And a lot of people accused him of being, too cautious. Well, the problem, if he had not been too cautious, we could already have been in a war and nuclear weapons could already have been used. So I'm glad he didn't do that, but it was not wise at all. In fact, it was foolish to try and dance around the edge and see how close we can come and to keep this thing going on, because every day the war goes on, the risk of miscalculation, error, mistake, something dumb happening that could accidentally get us drawn in there always remains. And we've had a number of things that could have gone a little bit more wrong and could have caused some problems. So far, they haven't. You need to understand there are those that would love to see that happen, and they're trying to get this done here. His bigger point about the finances are, look, we've seen $300 billion or so, plus or minus, over 4 years. And what have we won for that? Potentially 1 million Ukrainians dead. Certainly 20-something% of their country has been lost. Entire cities have been razed to the ground. Generations of men have been lost, never to be recovered. Even if the war ended today, even if by some magic in Miami tomorrow, they say, you know what, we want the war to end on the current line of contact, and Putin woke up in the morning and just said, you know what, okay, cool, we'll go ahead and do that. And it happened. The cost to Ukraine has already been catastrophic and profound. They talk about they want to have an 800-man army at the end of this. I mean, that's absurd. Where are they going to get 800? They don't even have that many now. And you see, they don't even have the personnel for that. So I don't know where they think they're going to get those people from. That's just pure fantasy. You have lost so many that you don't have that capacity. That's what we have earned and bought for $300 billion. And the insecurity on our border, and as despite what is claimed by some, there has been a significant impact on the Russian side, negative. They have lost probably hundreds of thousands killed and wounded. It's nowhere near what is claimed, this 1.5 million, some absurd number. There's no evidence that that's happened. But there, even on the Russian side, there is admission. There have been substantial killed and wounded, huge numbers, more than I think that they've lost in any conflict since World War II. So it's not been minor. But here's where we fall down. We just look at the casualty count and say, yay, from these weird perverted ideas, yay, that's cool that Russia's weaker. No, they're not weaker. They're stronger militarily than they were because of the losses, because they have replaced the losses. And now then their armed forces are somewhere around 500,000 more than they were in February 2022. Much more important than the number, however, is their capacity, because their industrial capacity is off the charts. Their technological evolution is way, way beyond where it was in 2022, way beyond where we are. We are tinkering around the edges with technical evolutions. Russians live and die with it every day. So they have profound existential motivation to continue to put a lot of effort in to come up with new technological advances. We've seen that with the FPV drones. We've seen it then with the fiber optic drones, now a 65-kilometer version of it that's coming out, et cetera, which keeps putting the kill zone further and further back on top of the artillery shells that they keep producing in high numbers, on top of the glide bombs, which continue to also accelerate in range and lethality. And of course, their missiles, their cruise missiles, their Oreshniks, their hypersonics, all of these continue to be evolved at rapid pace. Their power now is profoundly stronger than it was when we started. Congratulations. That's what we have won with $300 billion. We purchased a much stronger Russia on our border than we have. And in the process of doing it, we are weaker than we were, because our technological advances have inched along while theirs has been running in yards and meters. Our troops, we continue to decline. We still don't have any direct combat experience of what's going on. We can study it, and that's helpful. But until you've lived it, as the Russians and the Ukrainian troops have both proven, your learning curve is just a blip on the screen. You have to be in it and bloodied and see that things work and things that don't. And the United States Army hasn't done it. The French Army hasn't done it. The Polish Army hasn't done it. They've incrementally improved. I'm sure that they have, but it's incremental. That's just the truth of it. So Patrick Kennington was pointing out that what we have spent, $300 billion in 4 years, has backfired spectacularly on us, and we just have to hope that we can get this over with quickly, so that we don't spend even more money to learn even worse lessons and end up even worse conditions. A couple of other things I want to point out that happened this week. An interesting discussion by Zelensky on Christmas Day. He had a couple of different messages on Christmas Day. I talked about one where it was all about PR, and he said he wished that Putin dies on Christmas. That's the prayer of every Ukrainian. And, you know, he had this really dramatic video with candles and camera movement and dramatic music and all that kind of stuff, kind of made a production out of it. He also had one where he talked about in the process of getting ready to meet with the United States here, which is going to be tomorrow, he talked about he has some new ideas.
Сьогодні ж практично годину говорили з представниками президента Сполучених Штатів Америки. Ми говорили зі Стівом Віткофом та Джаредом Кушнером. І це була Справді хороша розмова, багато деталей. Є хороші ідеї, ми їх обговорили. Є деякі наші нові ідеї, як наблизити реальний мир. І це стосується форматів, це стосується зустрічей, безумовно, таймінгу.
So Zelensky has maintained consistency. If there's one thing you can say about him, he has not wavered. He has not wavered in all the Biden years. He has not wavered since Trump won the election. He has not wavered since Trump was inaugurated this past January. He is still consistent with this fantasy that he can succeed, that he can coerce the more powerful Russian side, which I just described, into submitting to his version of how this could end. He used to say during the Biden part, especially in 1991 borders, we're going to drive Russia out and all that kind of stuff. 2023 finally set that at ease. And then in the subsequent years, then he finally said, okay, well, tell you what, we'll take the current line of contact, end it there, and then we'll get the rest of it back with negotiations later. That'll work. Now all I have to do is get Russia to agree to a ceasefire on terms that benefit me, and everything will be fine. That's what he said. It's been absurd the whole time he said it, but he's still saying it now. And now then, in the 11th month of the Trump administration, on the eve of this meeting, and he's had quite a few since this war started, he says, hey, I'm going to have some new ideas. And the new ideas are talking about meetings and other kinds of, new ways to talk about things which have nothing to do with the actual conditions on the ground. It has nothing to do with war resolution. It does not in any way address the military superiority of the Russian side on the line of contact. But that's where he's at. So he's continuing to say there. And then one reasonably can ask, why is President Trump bringing him here yet again? I mean, genuinely, if ever there was going to be a light bulb moment, it would have been on, I think it was the 28th or so of February, when they had that big blow up in the Oval Office, and he got into a shouting match with the Vice President Vance or with President Trump, et cetera. That should have told you all you needed to know right then. That should have eliminated any possibility of understanding Zelensky is not going to be rational. He is only going to view things in his maximalist positions that he wants to impose upon the stronger side. Trump has many times over the last number of months acknowledged this power imbalance, acknowledged that the gap exists, that the Russians have it, and all this stuff. And he mentions the right things. He talks about personnel. He talks about industrial capacity. He talks about history. He talks about the tradition that Russia has had since they've been invaded by Napoleon and by Hitler. And now that in this current environment here, 3 consecutive times, and the Russians always suffered a lot at the beginning, and they always came back, and one which he also pointed out. So then one may reasonably ask, why are you going to bring him back again? Since his comment heading into the meeting on Christmas Day, and apparently in some of his comments that he made earlier today, that he's still where he was. So what does President Trump think is going to be different about this meeting? Now, unless Trump is bringing him in to just read him the riot act and finally say what Colonel McGregor has said on our show a bunch of times, what I have repeated as well, is that you need to say, we're going to do this, and that's it. You either get on board or figure it out with the Europeans, because we're not going to underwrite known failure anymore after X dates, whatever it is. Now, if he's going to do that, then this has some potential value to the United States. But if he doesn't, Zelensky is just going to say the same thing he did before, and there'll be some performative press conference afterwards, whether it's Zelensky, like the last time you remember that things didn't go well with him and Trump. You remember that just a few months back, and Zelensky literally went outside the bar, the gate, the iron bars outside the White House, and gave a speech before his media. No, they didn't do it in the White House. They didn't have the press conference like they almost always have. He had to go outside the White House on his own, standing there in front of a gate. I mean, the imagery couldn't have been more stark. And yet, here we are again. He's going back again. And so what's going to be different? What is the plan of the United States? I mean, this kind of exposes that we don't have one. There doesn't seem to be any kind of objective. I don't even know what President Trump's objective is. He says he wants the war to be over. But as we see in this clip here from President Trump, even in public, he doesn't seem to have an idea how he wants this to end.
So the talks in Ukraine, Russia are going along. They lost, as you know, 27,000 soldiers last month, mostly soldiers, some people, but some people in Kyiv, etc., but mostly soldiers. And I say that, there's tremendous hatred between these two leaders. between President Putin, President Zelensky, tremendous hatred. You remember at the beginning of that whole thing, I gave them javelins. Javelins are the anti-tank busters. But you know, the bottom line, it's time for, I think they're all tired of that war. Everyone's tired of that war. It's got to stop.
That's it. And he just went, all right, next question. And that's it. Didn't talk anymore about it. The question is, what are we going to do now? The question that was posed to him is, what are we going to do now? What is the plan with Zelensky coming in? And he just rambled for minutes, just kept rambling, talking about, you know, Obama only gave him sheets. I gave him javelins. Biden sucks. Everything's Biden's fault. You know, the kind of normal stuff that he does all the time. And then just kind of concludes by, you know, everybody's tired of it. Well, I think that's the one true point of it, that he's just tired of it. He's tired of dealing with it, tired of messing with it, but he doesn't have a vision for what he wants to accomplish. He doesn't know what he wants the end to look like. There is no end state in his mind. And if you don't know what you're trying to accomplish, then genuinely, how can any action have a positive outcome when you don't even know what it's supposed to accomplish? Just having another meeting? I mean, if he's not going to do some version of what I just described there about telling him it's either put up or shut up, follow these deals, or you're on your own. If it's not that, then honestly, you could have had a phone call with him. But why go through all the pomp and circumstance of having another meeting come in, which just gives all the mics to Zelensky again and allows him to be in front of all the American audience again, etc. I just don't understand it. I truly don't understand what the intent is for President Trump. Now, that's not true of everybody in the West, because there are some in the West who have a very definite idea what they want, and that is led first and foremost by the warluster in chief, Lindsey Graham.
If Putin says no, we need to dramatically change the game, including giving Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine to hit the drone and missile factories that exist in Russia. I would go all in if Putin says no.
See, Lindsey Graham has an idea, and he would love to go all in on Russia, nuclear-armed Russia. By the way, I mentioned that Russia has an active duty force right now of 1.5 million. Do you realize that the U.S. land forces, the U.S. Army and Marine Corps, I think when you add all those two together, it's less than 500,000 total. And that means logistics, supply, clerks, institutional, training, schools, that kind of thing. I'm talking everybody on active duty in the U.S. Army and Marine Corps is less than 500,000. Russia has 1.5 million on that. So do you understand? You understand what I'm going with this? We have about 1/3 ground forces that the Russians have right now. And you want to go all in against that country. And of course, the nuclear power between the two is despite the number, it doesn't really even matter the number. Once you get past a few hundred missiles, it's irrelevant. It's just overkill. There's parity there. There's nuclear threats and parity between the two that could wipe out both countries many times over. Why do you want to go all in against that country? What is the possible benefit to our country? That's the part where Lindsey doesn't have a view. He just has this vision for what he wants, and he's trying everything in his power to draw President Trump in. So you see, it's a double team. You have Zelensky on the one hand, and then you have Lindsey Graham, his golfing buddy, on another. And listen, I'm going to do a whole show on Lindsey Graham tomorrow, because this is a much, much bigger deal than it may appear. There's going to be a show tomorrow where you're going to see in context a lot of how Lindsey Graham is constantly in Trump's ear telling him, kill Maduro, kill the Venezuelans, kill Hamas, kill Iran, kill Russians, all over the place. Everybody he wants to lead with killing somebody. And then he mocks and laughs at a Republican meeting that we're killing all the right people. I love the Republican Party. He mocks that and laughs. That is much more dangerous than you think, because he's got the president's ear, and as importantly, he has the microphones and the cameras across the board in the Western world. Everybody, for some reason, loves this guy, I guess, because he gives all these outlandish statements. But the problem is this message of kill everybody first, and then he has incredible amounts of misinformation and disinformation that goes along with that. It is poisonous to our future. And I talk about that, especially if people listen to him. Watch that on Sunday. We're gonna be having a special show on that tomorrow. But that's where we are, and that's what President Trump is facing and will face in Mar-a-Lago. I think that's where the meeting is going to take place. I don't think this one's going to be at the White House. I believe it's going to be at Mar-a-Lago, and President Trump is going to have a double team, and a domestic one and a Zelensky one, and we're going to see who's stronger. Well, listen, that's oh no, I'm sorry. I do have one more. I wanted to mention, speaking of Venezuela, because one of the things that I'm going to talk about tomorrow is how Lindsey Graham is saying that we need to kill Maduro, and if he's still in power, then we have utterly failed. Larry Johnson was on the show this week, and he addressed that very issue.
President Trump has been very clear that he is going to use the full power of the United States of America, the full might of the United States, to take on and eradicate these drug cartels which have operated with impunity in our hemisphere for far too long, and everyone knows it.
Trump thinks he can kill his way out of this, and he can't. He'll find it out the hard way. It will burn his presidency to the ground. And, you know, it's his own damn fault. But unfortunately, there are going to be a lot of Venezuelans who'll die in the process, and a lot of American soldiers that'll die in the process. George W. Bush thought he had it going when he did his mission accomplished speech, and didn't realize that the worst was yet to come. And I think that Venezuela has the potential to be much worse, simply because the kind of planning you should do in terms of, okay, we're going to go in, we're going to try to take control of this country. What are we going to need to do in order to secure that? That level of planning has not been done, I'll guarantee you.
You talk about somebody that needs to be in the president's ear. Larry Johnson is somebody that needs to be in the president's ear. Jacques Beau is somebody that needs to be in the president's ear on these very issues, on these hot button issues. Because if he gets advice from people like that, then he's got a much better chance of making rational decisions that actually work to American interests, that are America first, that actually have a chance to come out with something that's beneficial to our country, because they have a vision, they have an end state in mind, they have an attainable military and political objective. These people can do stuff like that. The information exists, but if you're continuing to listen to Zelensky, if you're continuing to listen to the likes of Lindsey Graham, if you're continuing to listen to these business leaders, a lot of these military industrial complex dudes that make all kinds of money, if those are the guys you surround yourself with, or if you surround yourself with only sycophants who are going to tell you what you want to hear and they're afraid to tell you the truth, then you have the likelihood that you make bad choices and that we have bad outcomes that are most decidedly not America first or America best. So that's kind of the message here. That's kind of the view from the Daniel Davis Deep Dive from this past week. And we got obviously a lot of things heading into next week. So we're going to see a flurry of activity, I imagine, probably before the end of the year. We'll do some other stuff later on about kind of to wrap up 2025. But I think next week is going to have a lot of action too. We'll see what's going to happen with it, because there's a lot of things hanging over. Is President Trump going to use force against Maduro in Venezuela? You got that Damocles sword hanging over the whole situation. Is he going to listen to Lindsey Graham? Are we going to give Israel the green light to go back into Iran, to go back into Hamas, and to start that war back again? And are we going to listen to Zelensky? Is that going to happen again? Is Trump going to give him something he wants and just keep that thing and try to maybe just kick it down the road a little bit more? Is he going to do something more? Who knows? A lot of things could happen this past week. So stay tuned to the Daniel Davis Deep Dive. But for sure, look at the show we're going to have for you tomorrow so you'll understand the real nature. We're going to expose the truth of Lindsey Graham behind his misinformation and lust for combat. That's what we're going to talk about tomorrow. Thank you very much, folks. We really appreciate you. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week, actually tomorrow, on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive. You know, I don't try to talk you into buying gold or tell you how to run your stock portfolio, but there is a way you can help us. Subscribe. Hit that like button and share this with somebody you love.